Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk. I am Shekhar Gupta in the lawns of the Czech Republic's embassy in Delhi. And not because I think mistakenly that I have diplomatic immunity, but in any case, I'm going to break two rules today. One is the rule of Walk the Talk. We never display a brand or talk about it or a product. And number two, I never allowed the use of the word iconic in my editorial life for anything else than an icon. And I will tell you now why we break these rules. Because my guest today is Mr. Thomas George Bata. And Mr. Bata, this shoe is not an ordinary shoe, isn't it?
No, it's a very special shoe.
Tell us about it.
Well, maybe I can tell you that, first of all, we're in the Czech embassy because 120 years ago, the Bata company was founded by my grandfather, who at that time lived in what later on became the Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And the business evolved internationally.
It was then an Austro-Hungarian empire when it started, yes.
And actually it's quite interesting because people don't realize that at that time Europe was a totally free market.
Absolutely, yes.
So you could ship shoes anywhere in the world. And my grandfather had been to the United States. And he had met two interesting gentlemen. One was Mr. Henry Ford, who was just starting his motor cars and had the principle of production. And the second thing was a Mr. B.F. Goodrich. Mr. B.F. Goodrich was the inventor of vulcanized rubber.
Absolutely.
And they actually started making shoes with vulcanized rubber. So that after 12 centuries or 12 generations of shoemakers, he was the first person taking those ideas to start evolving to make footwear in a more...
And this was a shoe that he personally designed and made.
Well, this shoe comes a little bit later. Because this shoe was launched because it was one of my father's favorite shoes, this type of shoe, because it was really the excellence of shoemaking. And so for the 120th anniversary, this shoe, which is called the One, because it incorporates every element you can possibly think of excellence in shoes. And every part of the shoe really is designed in such a way of taking the best of traditional shoemaking that exists.
Carries your father's signature and a number.
And it carries my father's signature, and it's a limited number of pairs that were made. First of all, because it's a very special shoe, and it's not so easy to find the tradesmen to do this, and it's also a very expensive shoe.
I thought you were about to say it's not very easy to find the feet to fit it, but that's why we don't mind you displaying it, because we know that you have a limited number.
Absolutely.
So I can't be either accused of selling your shoe, or nor will I come back to you claiming
Absolutely,
it.
You won't be able to buy this shoe.
But tell me something, Mr. Bata.
Sure.
Aren't you amazed by how many Indians believe that Bata is an Indian brand, almost like Tata?
Well, I'm thrilled that it's perceived that way, and obviously I understand because it was started in 1932, actually by many of the Czech pioneers who came there originally coming to India for looking for raw materials. And then they then saw an opportunity to start serving the markets. And so we've been here an awful long time.
Because many of us, when we travel overseas and we see a Bata store, until you know very well, you have a sense of pride, thinking, oh, there's an Indian brand here.
Absolutely. I enjoy meeting Indians around the world who expressed that they were delighted to see a Bata store in the Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich.
Right.
And I believe that's one of our strengths, is that we are an international company, but we try to stay very close to the local markets.
But they complain that they can't see one in London, because that is Indians' favorite shopping city.
And we're going to have to put that right.
Right.
You know, over 120 years, your business has to change and evolve.
Right.
And clearly at some stage, believe it or not, England was a major shoemaking country. We had 7 factories in India, supplying the United States, supplying the Caribbean, supplying Africa. But things evolved. Today you don't find too many shoemaking operations left in the UK.
How is a Bata store different from any other shoe company's store? I haven't been to a Bata store for a long time, I have to confess.
Well, I think you'd be surprised if you go to the Bata store. You'll find some very comfortable men's shoes. How is it different? I believe the stores are becoming larger. We have a much larger offer. It has become now a store where you can buy Bata branded shoes, or you can buy other brands. Some of them are our own international brands. Some of them we select the best international brands which fit our profile in the Bata store, which is more comfort with style. And we've launched recently our non-footwear activities, which are handbags, accessories, and that's an extremely fast growing thing. Plus, I would hope that you have a great shopping experience when you go to the stores. And another thing that's happened is where the stores are located. They call them showrooms in India.
Yes.
And that's to a great extent what they are. And we've been also following the population to open stores closer to where people live.
Tell us something about the history of Bata pricing, because that's very much a part of your product.
Well, I think sometimes we were given credit for the 99
Yes.
pricing. I'm not sure it's true, but in any case...
everybody calls it Bata pricing. In the business of sales and
so
marketing.
a lot of people have copied us around the world since then. I mean, we've always tried to offer real value. But let's say we've always been trying to follow how, let's say, people are more prosperous today, and we have the availability of all sorts of materials. So the mix of products that people expect to find from us has changed somewhat.
So
but the concept of value still
is there a story to how this 99 came into being?
You know, I wish I could tell you what the story is. Maybe my father could have explained it. But I think it was, again, there's clearly a perception.
Right.
If you say $9.99, it's not quite 10.
10, yes.
And since, you know, in the history of the company, Bata always tried to excel in making good products, but unbeatable value. And I think that was part of the value story and the differentiation.
And finally, Kmart ruined it by calling everything 0.99.
They probably did, yes. Now everybody is ruining the business by having 50% off, 40% off,
This business
20%
has
off.
survived revolutions.
Yes. Expropriations.
Nazism.
Yes.
Nationalization.
Yeah.
Socialism.
Right.
In Czechoslovakia and India. And
That's
all
right.
your factories were taken over
Many were
in
nationalized.
Czechoslovakia,
Yes.
and you had to manufacture in
Yeah.
Canada, because I believe also that your father was afraid that if he stayed on too much in America, his employees and other interests may be affected even more in Europe at that point.
No, my father's relationship with America was because as a young boy, he was sent in the 30s to start
Right.
the Canadian business
Right.
there. No, I think America was always a form of inspiration for him. And at the time, America was also a big shoemaking center for the world. So I don't think that was so much of a concern there. But as you said, nationalizations in the 60s, we were nationalized in Indonesia, in Asia. We were forced to sell a large part of the businesses in many parts of the world. But we had a tradition of hanging in there. The most recent country is actually Zimbabwe. Nobody's left in
Obviously,
Zimbabwe.
you have a thick hide.
Well, we also
Batas have a thick hide.
we look at a more long-term perspective, and we try to keep that in mind. Now, sometimes it's not tenable, and you can't continue into that. And there are many countries which we have left because either we went through a period that it was absolutely untenable to continue, or there might have been competitive elements. But let's say a place like West Africa, we had a huge presence there, and then because of many of the things you said, it disappeared. And now we're rebuilding 20 years later, presence in those countries, but a different business
It was
model.
tough
than
to
we
do
had
business
before.
in India as well,
Well, it was very tough, yes.
Import rubbers, soles.
Well, and also for a long time, the shoe industry was considered a artisanal, small-scale industry, and hence everything was extremely regulated. And of course, industrial relations was a challenge because it was very much tied into politics. And not many of our competitors from that period, there were brands like Croydon, which were quite well known, they all disappeared. But we hung in there, fortunately, because I think we have...
And there was also a caste issue in India, which places limitations on who you get to work for you.
I'm not totally familiar with those issues, but there were many, many hurdles. But again, we managed, and I would say the biggest challenge was actually about 10, 12, 13 years ago, when there was clearly a wind of change in the country. And we had lived with 50 years pent-up issues, which we had to change very quickly or go out of business.
And then my generation shifted to other brands because others became available.
And there are other brands available, and there was more prosperity. And I would say about 15 or 20 years ago, when India really changed tact and started to encourage more private investment and more flexibility in labor laws, clearly there's quite a few competitors sprung up.
See, the other unusual thing about
Yeah.
Bata is it is still very much a family-owned and family-run business, which
Yes.
seems like an anachronism. You know, family-run businesses are now boutique businesses. You go to
Yeah.
so-and-so's bakery in such and such village in France, and you get bread done, sourdough bread done exactly the way it was done 500 years ago. But not a big consumer business anymore.
Well, you'd be surprised how many large family businesses there are, or businesses which may be listed, like even India, we're a publicly listed company. But the
I think
family,
almost $1 billion market cap now.
I believe so, yes.
Right.
And yet I believe these really successful businesses, if you look at them, are a bit of a combination where there is a publicly listed element, but it's controlled by a family. And I think the advantage is families tend to look a little bit long term, but the publicly listing forces you to really constantly re-look at your performance and frankly not become too sentimental about what you've done in the past, but to be more forward-looking and adjust as we try to adjust to the new markets.
So you and your father, did you have conversations about how family business will now change, how life will change for you compared to the way it was for him?
Well, my father's feeling was it's a responsibility, and actually being involved in a family business is a responsibility. So I think it was more in that context. Like any shift in generation, it was not without its challenges, because a closing a factory or to align with what's actually happening was always considered somewhat of a defeat, if you want. And so there was always a bit of resilience, reticence to maybe make some of the changes we needed to do. But my father was a special person because he was a very pragmatic person. He had, when we kind of evolved our structure of head offices, his point was in his lifetime he had changed 3 times.
Right.
So let young Tom do, not so young anymore, but let young Tom do what he thinks he should do if it's good for the business.
But he had strong issues on responsible capitalism, just as, say, Mr. Tata does.
Yes, absolutely. No, and I think that any good business obviously is sensitive to being highly ethical and trying to run a business which has makes a good contribution and is an example. But my father was particularly important to that the business really isn't for the benefit of the family. The business it's almost like a mission. And I guess his period was like a mission. It was shoemaker to the world. When he grew the business after the war, it was really a vision to help provide more shoes.
In some ways you were a victim of the war, but in other ways, your global rise was a consequence of that victimization.
Absolutely. If you look at the headquarters now in Zlin, it's a 15-story building. And
Zlin, Czech Republic.
Zlin is Czech Republic, where the business started. It was a small. And now it's owned by the government because we couldn't afford such a big building there. And actually that would have become, I think, a real handicap because you couldn't run our type of business in the way it was run back before the war. So I remember chatting with my dad sometimes. I said, Dad, in many ways you were lucky because you had to re-look at the business in a very decentralized manner rather than the centralized model that existed. And I think that was the model that was good in the 60s and 70s and 80s.